All right, so let's get into Israel. This very, very touchy and difficult, horrible situation, really, is the only way to describe it. Very, very difficult, very complex situation. But I don't think it's so complicated that we can't discuss it. And from the standpoint of Red, White, and Blind, where the purpose of this channel is to break through the spells and the deception, the lies in the corporate media and discern the story behind the story, I think it really is worthwhile taking a quick look. Now, I'm not an expert in the Israel situation. In terms of my ethnicity, I have one Jewish side of my family, one side is not Jewish, and I could get into that further, but I won't. I think I see both sides of it, at least with some clarity. I don't think I'm completely emotionally tied to one side. And I wanted to offer my thoughts about this because I think it's, so dominant in the media right now. To start, a lot of times people will go into the history and try to establish, Palestine was here first, or Israel was here first, or what the history was. And there are maps from 1947 that show Palestine right there. And then there's others on the more Israeli side who say that those Arabs were just colonists from Saudi Arabia. There's so much convoluted history to this. It really is a chicken and the egg. It's like, where do you start? Do you start your history at this point, or this point, or this point, or this point? And I do think it's important to understand the history to get a real true handle on any complex or even not very complex situation, to know the history. But in this particular case, I think the history actually maybe is being overplayed. It's been tied in knots so many times, I think it's impossible to untie at this point. And so rather than discuss the history, I think we just discuss the present. The present we can have a clearer view at. And I think if we look at the present situation on the ground, what we have is a Israeli government that is clearly dominant over the land of Gaza and the West Bank. They're able to control what people in Gaza are able to order, what comes in and what goes out of Gaza completely. So whether that's water and food and medical supplies, or that's technology. And I think it's worthwhile to think about how that would be to live in a place where by your ethnicity or by your religion, you are identified as a group that has less power than a dominant group. And that's when you have to look at the present, forget the past, and compare it to things where we've seen that happen in the past. Places like North America with the Native Americans, or China with the Tibetans, where I spent some time, or South Africa, right, where they call this apartheid. And I think it's a reasonable description of what's going on in Israel is apartheid. And when you have a situation like this, you're inevitably going to have what are called terrorist attacks. And the attacks are horrendous that's happened. The loss of life on both sides is horrendous. And most of the world fully supports the right of Israelis to punish criminals, to enforce their laws, to prevent acts of terrorism like this. But if you maintain an apartheid state, if you maintain this such a huge imbalance of power, and you raise people, like there are people now that have lived 20 years in Gaza, children born there, that have never been able to have control over their own life, have never been able to come and go as they please, never been able to, have running water all the time, like these kinds of things that are available just across the border. And so I think if you continue this way, you're going to inevitably have these kinds of attacks, unfortunately. So I do believe that a two-state solution is what's necessary at this point. I think it's the only thing that can be humane or sustainable. And if we do witness Israel invade Gaza and kill or remove 2 million people from that area, we will have to call it ethnic cleansing or genocide, however you define those words. I don't think there's any other way to talk about this. And it's really been fascinating but horrifying to hear in the mainstream media, particularly on the red side, the red news, with Fox and some of the people on the talk radio on that side, basically calling for the final. I don't think they use the word the final solution, but it's like finish them. That was what it was. Finish the job. What does that mean, to finish the job? I think these words by Scott Ritter that appear on the Jimmy Dore show are instructive.
This is a conflict that cannot end until one side or the other has been decisively beaten and is willing to make the kind of compromises that they're not willing to make now. And frankly speaking, given the level of suffering that the Palestinian people have undergone over the past 7 decades, they're not likely to be the side that breaks first. Israel is a fundamentally broken nation morally. It's a nation that, regardless of what you think, I know some people take umbrage at this, but I happen to be somebody who believes that Israel has the right to exist, and that we should respect Israel's right to exist, but not in the way that it exists today. You can't exist on the backs of people that you've enslaved, and they have enslaved the Palestinians. In fact, it's worse than slavery, because slaves at least get to have the pretense of working in the fields, pretending for a moment maybe they're free. The Palestinians, especially those in Gaza, are stuck in this open-air prison, not of their own construct. Israel underwent a fundamental change in its demographics and politics in the 1990s when they opened the doors to the former Soviet Union, and hundreds of thousands of Soviet Jews fled to Israel, altering the balance. So when I was in Israel in the 1990s, there was a struggle between right and left, but both agreed that there was a necessity for peace. However imperfect their political solutions might have been, I know for a fact that Yitzhak Rabin was looking for a peaceful outcome, looking for a settlement before he was assassinated by a right-wing Israeli. And now Benjamin Netanyahu has stepped into the gap, and ever since then, Israel has been drifting towards an even more radical right-wing solution. As long as Benjamin Netanyahu and his ilk are in power in Israel, there is no hope for peace, none whatsoever. And you are right. Israel will go into Gaza with a vengeance, and hundreds, if not thousands, of Palestinians will lose their lives.
Another thing that hasn't been covered in the mainstream media is the fact that Israel appears to have been warned about the attack before it happened. I'd like to leave you with this message from Amber Yang of Peers, which is an organization that does media activism on their own and that I support. These are her words. The geopolitical turmoil in Israel and Gaza has appropriately captured our collective attention. Wherever you stand on this important issue, it can be exhausting and heartbreaking to make sense of this deeply complex issue. The culture and information wars playing out in the media have generated ferocious argument, yet very little clarity about how we can engage with each other across the vast differences in the information we consume. At Peers, we question any narrative that justifies war or keeps us divided into us versus them camps. There is unspeakable suffering and innocent people dying on both sides. Acknowledging the basic humanity at stake is not affiliated with a side, nor dependent on an enemy to destroy. The ultimate weakness of violence is that it is a descending spiral, begetting the very thing it seeks to destroy. Through violence you may murder the liar, but you cannot murder the lie, nor establish the truth. Through violence you murder the hater, but you do not murder hate. In fact, violence merely increases hate. Along the way of life, someone must have enough sense and morality to cut off the chain of hate. Martin Luther King. This is especially important when we debate and discuss shared versions of reality and history about this complex conflict. How would we relate to this issue if the goal wasn't to have clear answers or to determine who is in the right or wrong? India's first and longest-serving Prime Minister, Nehru, once said, "Let us be a little humble. Let us think that the truth may not be entirely with us." And I'll leave it there. My prayers are with the children and the civilians on both sides, and I do hope that all of us can resolve to balance our media diets to get a broader set of perspectives so that we can, in the words of Amber Yang, question any narrative that justifies war or keeps us divided into us versus them camps. Wherever you stand on this very complex and difficult situation, I hope that you will balance your media diet, listen to others, address perspectives that are not your own. For we all have to, at some point, in the words of Martin Luther King, be those who have enough sense and morality to cut off the chain of hate. Thank you. This is Tony Bersunas. This is Red, White, and Blind. If you like and enjoy this content, please feel free to share and subscribe. Best wishes.